welcome to the Washington Times Politically Unstable. I'm Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times. Today, I am joined by Seth Denson, who's a business and market analyst, and we're going to be talking about the marketing pains of going woke. Most recently, it was Cracker Barrel, who modernized their logo, was going to refresh the brand, and then it sparked, a lot of backlash, both from the online community and from the President of the United States, who weighed in, saying that they should not take the old man and the barrel off their logo. And the company, after going back and forth and defending its decisions and blaming actually its customers, agreed that they're not going to change their logo after all. Seth, what do you make of all of this drama?
Yeah, Kelly, it's a great question. And it's interesting as I think and evaluate various businesses all day, every day. It's kind of what I do. It really goes back to the heart. I'd love to make it really complex, specific to Cracker Barrel. I think it's quite simple. They didn't know their customer. And it's a challenge that we see playing out oftentimes. Obviously, we have the Bud Light example. You see Disney in the limelight a lot these days. But effectively, what Cracker Barrel did was they likely, and again, I don't know all the details, hired a marketing firm that candidly didn't know what their customers expected. And the reality is, for a company like Cracker Barrel, it's deeply a Southern company. My parents love it. I'm from the South, born and raised. I still live in the South today. My parents, if you ask them where you want to go to dinner, they're a lot of times going to say Cracker Barrel. And it's not because of the food. Candidly, I think that the solution for Cracker Barrel largely could be in the fact that they should improve their food, not change their logo. But the reality is it transports you back in time to grandma's house and the front porch and the farm table and all of that. So all of that to say, this is an essential component in business that you've got to understand who your customers are. And if you're trying to gain new market share, you've got to do that without alienating what market share you currently have. I think Cracker Barrel could recover from this. To your point, they've changed very quickly. They've gone back and said, the great thing about people in the South, and I think people generally across the United States, is they're very forgiving if you're willing to eat a little bit of humble pie. And maybe, I don't know, Cracker Barrel, that could be something you launch. We're going to serve grandma's humble pie. And that just might win some hearts and minds back.
Well, you wrote a column for us on this, and part of your column explains that Cracker Barrel was losing market share. It was underperforming. It is a business after all, and it's a multi-million-dollar business. I mean, after they launched this marketing campaign or this rebrand, they lost over $100 million in the market from the value of their stock. Because of the backlash in trading, after they said that they are going to go back to the original logo, they're up in the markets right now. But that doesn't mean that they don't need to do something to help their business model. And I think the CEO was concentrated on that. They did a woke marketing campaign up in New York City with influencers with their food. But it's getting away from what you said is the core of their business and their customers and the nostalgia and being from the South. But I mean, what should they do? I mean, they arguably, all of this backlash is a multi-billion-dollar campaign for them. Cracker Barrel, we're now talking about it. We weren't talking about it last week or last month. But what do they need to do to position themselves better and to make money, quite frankly?
Yeah. It's a great point, and it's certainly something they should have been asking in the boardrooms, which, what they probably should have done is gone and hired a marketing firm and said, how do we refresh the brand? The brand is the food and the experience. That's truly the brand. It's not the logo. And what they need to do is focus in on those things and recognize that a key demographic for Cracker Barrel today is the over age 65. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason that demographic remains a key constituent, if you will, of Cracker Barrel is that it does give them a wholesome experience. And I think what they did was they tried to get away from that versus saying, how do we make sure that wholesome experience, free from anxiety, kind of laid back, casual, hits the next generation, who, by the way, largely wants that experience too, if you can go to them appropriately. And that's where they miss. But I'd love to make it really complex too, Kelly. Here's the reality. Their food's gone bad. They've cut corners, and in a tight margin scenario, Cracker Barrel operates about 1.5% margin when some of their competitors are as high as 20 and 30%. So what Cracker Barrel did was, rather than make sure they managed prices and quality well, they cut corners and the quality went down. And so when the quality of the food goes down and the experience, you're changing that too. You've lost everything. And so they need to get back to their roots, back to that wholesome cooking, invest heavier in better quality of foods and experiences. And then the last thing I think they need to do, and I say this as a parent, when I go meet my folks there and we go to Cracker Barrel and I get my mediocre biscuits and gravy, is I then have to go stand in line to check out, right? And those are little things that next generation, they do want a simpler experience. And candidly, there's a lot of competition out there. They're all fighting for that market share. So Cracker Barrel needs to adopt some of the great things around technology while making sure they lean into the great thing, which is that experience of the way things used to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Customer service is always going to be the number one. I was just there a few weeks ago with my boys, my 3 boys. And, we had to wait half an hour to even be seated. And the restaurant was empty. They just didn't have enough wait staff. So little things like that improve the experience while keeping it authentic. But, Cracker Barrel isn't the only company that has gotten away from its customers. You mentioned Bud Light and the Dylan Mulvaney. They still haven't recovered from that era. We had Jaguar have a car campaign that featured no cars, just a bunch of androgynous looking people in colorful clothes. Recently there's been American Eagle, which featured Sydney Sweeney, which got backlash from the left for saying that her jeans campaign was eugenics and it was white supremacy or something. It's just crazy. But do you feel like these companies need to get away from, their cultural references, either going too far to the right or going too far to the left? And are we seeing kind of the demise now that Donald Trump's back in the presidency again, away from kind of the focus on DEI, which has been prevalent really within the last decade?
Yeah, I oftentimes say that money is mobile and it will go to where it's going to have the most success. And I think certainly the president has played a role in reframing the conversation around DEI, but he's done it in a way that I think has been really positive, in that this isn't about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can still do those things. It's just a matter of don't virtue signal it. And let's make sure we remember what's at the heart of this, which is generating a profit. And that investors and patrons, they don't want to be preached at. They want a product, whether that's food, whether that's shoes, whether that's clothing. It's interesting. You go back to Michael Jordan, for example, who at one point was asked, specifically about his political preferences. And he said, I'm not answering that. Why? Because Republicans buy tennis shoes too, or sneakers. I'm sure I butchered that. But effectively, it's the same thing. And what's interesting, Kelly, though, in this, and it's a very macro level research thing that we're doing here on my staff, is looking at the fact that when companies really lean into more of a virtue signal DEI, as opposed to just quietly behind the scenes do it and make sure that they've got voices from all points of view, which, by the way, is a very positive thing. Companies like Costco and others have done that fairly well and balanced that well over the course of the last couple of decades. Companies that lean into it and make it more of a virtue signal, though, that's when they fail. And they fail for 2 reasons. One is they try to adapt to a market that candidly isn't their customer. We see that in Disney. Disney, over the last number of Pixar movies and other things they've done, they've really tried to lean into the LGBTQ community. And guess what? Those aren't the people that we're seeing in their movies. So that's why people didn't go. Now, Disney fortunately has a bunch of investments in other places, and so they've been able to weather that storm somewhat. But look at Snow White. It did terrible in most of the last Pixar movies. But then you flip that and you look at a company like American Eagle, who I thought it was a pretty solid ad, and it wasn't a political ad, it wasn't a racist ad, but it hit at the heart. And what they got out of it though was they got the what I call the defense marketing. Because so many people came to American Eagle's defense in those days thereafter, they sold out of that jeans line. And so it embraced it. And where am I going with this? The companies that try to virtue signal, they lose market share because they're doing it to appease a group that candidly isn't their customer. Wherein the other companies who don't try to do it, they just try to be wholesome in who they are, oftentimes find that conservatives by and large will embrace them and they will go out of their way to help lift them up. So what's the moral of the story? A lot of the liberal chasing companies find themselves at the bottom of the advantage winner. You know, they don't win. When the companies that just try to be more wholesome, guess what? Republicans, they don't buy sneakers too, they buy more of them.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting as you were explaining all of that. Another controversy, has been Snoop Dogg basically on a podcast criticizing Disney. He took his grandson to Lightyear and it was the LGBTQ focus. And he's like, why do I need this? And I didn't suspect this. I didn't walk into this movie I didn't want to have to explain this to my grandson, what this is all about. And I think that you're 100% right. It's about the left trying to force its virtues and its morality on us when there's no need, and it does repel people. Now Snoop Dogg is taking it from the left. He's always been a big supporter of the LGBTQ community, but when you go to a movie in the theater with young children, you kind of want the content to be relatively neutral and or inspiring, not politically focused.
That's right. And Kelly, I think the point that oftentimes gets missed, and again, I know a number of people in the LGBTQ community and people that I call friends and colleagues as well. And what they'll tell me oftentimes is it creates what we call the horseshoe effect, in that they're trying so hard to push a narrative. It actually has a negative impact on ultimately what they're trying to do, or at least they think they're trying to do, which is open up people's minds to different viewpoints. And that is really where we see so many. I mean, listen, Bud Light lost $25 billion in market share over the Dylan Mulvaney. And you can't trot out enough Clydesdale horses to bring that back, especially when there are alternatives out there. And so what businesses need to do in the boardrooms is get off of their high horse and get back to the basics, which is, do we have a quality product? Do we understand our vast market share? How do we gain new market share without alienating existing market share? And how do we make sure as best as possible we remain focused on our product, not our politics?
I just have one last question for you. And just based on your experience and what you've seen out there was a big corporate push to hire these DEI consulting firms to come into their companies and, I don't want to say wokeify, but for them to employ DEI practices and standards and hiring and whatnot. And then that kind of made its way to their marketing campaigns. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, just this consultancy. Do you see companies kind of lessening their grip? I know the president signed a bunch of executive orders basically outlawing this. Whether he has the legal authority to do that or not is questionable, and it's being challenged in the courts right now. But I mean, are you seeing just industry practice lessen their reliance on kind of these DEI consultants and trying to incorporate it into their brands?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I feel like we go through these market cyclical moments, and they probably are pushed in the narrative through these think tanks that put out these studies about what's really important. I mean, I remember in the 90s, it was all green energy. In the early 2000s, it was all green energy, and companies were hiring left and right, green energy consulting companies. And you're sitting there going, okay, well, this is an insurance company and you're hiring a green energy company? Like, help me understand that. But the reality is that was happening a lot. And now we went into this phase of DEI, and it was really ramped up in large part because you get these companies that find an opportunity. And I say, if there's a drip, somebody's going to stick a bucket there. And they saw a drip, they stuck a bucket, we flooded the market, and now businesses are going, well, wait a minute, that didn't actually help me gain margin or market share or any of that. And so it's interesting. If you look and study DEI, it's been around since the 60s. It just became this highlighted virtue component. And when it does that, it's like a fire that you pour gasoline on. It will erupt and it will burn for about 30 to 45 seconds. And then that fuel burns off. And then we get back to, was the fire actually built right? And is it going to sustain? I think DEI is one of those things which probably will cyclically go back to the way it was, where companies have people in the boardroom that help them understand the various components of the potential customer and employee. But we're going to get off of this, pour fire on it, burn. And then these consulting firms, well, they'll find the next cyclical thing that they go after.
All right. Seth Denson, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelly.